I don't differentiate this, what we're doing right now, with playing a concert for 10,000 people. It's all the same to me because my being here is to communicate with the audience or the person I'm engaging with, which happens to be you. It's the same thing if I'm performing or I'm talking about music or I'm doing a lesson or I'm doing an interview. It's to communicate, go back and forth, and utilize that communication skill. And I think that's the thing about those that are a little afraid of the technology. If you feel comfortable that you have the communication skills to do your job or your calling as an educator, then there's no problem because that's not going to hinder you. It's only going to allow you to reach more people.
Hello and welcome to the channel of doozzoo, the platform for professional music lessons with teaching tools for online lessons and on-site. My name is Aloisia Dauer and I'm excited to interview 4doozzoo musician colleagues about their teaching experiences with the platform, about online and hybrid music lessons, digital learning tools, and more. My interview guest is the Grammy and Emmy nominated guitarist David Becker. The journalist and TV presenter Roger Williamson called him one of the best jazz guitarists of all time, and the magazine Jazz Podium elevated him to the poet of the jazz guitar. With his band, David Becker Tribune, he played in around 20 countries and shared the stage with great musicians like Miles Davis, Chick Corea, and Joe DiOrio. He was born in 1961 in Cincinnati, Ohio, has published already numerous albums and several textbooks. But if this wasn't already enough, he is also passing on his knowledge to his students from many different countries. That's why he loves using tools for online music lessons, and he said about doozzoo that it is the best platform for online teaching he came across. I talked with him about his approach to teaching online lessons and the importance of music education. Keep on watching to learn more from David Becker. Hello, David, and thank you very much for the time that you're taking us to answer a few questions.
My pleasure.
David, you said in your testimony about doozzoo that is one of the best platforms for online teaching that you came across. So I assume you made your experience with teaching tools, and I would like you ask you right away, what do you like most about teaching with doozzoo?
Well, the thing is that originally I had used Zoom and what's the other one, Skype, and those are unreliable because that's more of a conversational tool. This is actually designed for a musical conversation in that I can share files immediately, I can share MP3s, I can record the sessions. There's a metronome. There's little tools that you would have if you were teaching one-on-one with somebody in the same room. And I just find it to be a lot easier to see the screen having the student next to me, and I can see everything. It's laid out much easier for me to be able to express what I want to do when I'm teaching, because a lot of teaching is conveying things that that person needs to understand in real time. And if you're not able to communicate through a source that allows you to do certain things, it's limiting. So I found that this is the best platform to do that on.
That's very nice to hear. How long are you already teaching online? When did you start?
Well, I think the first online students that I had were, it's a good question. It's probably about 5 years, maybe a little longer than that. And of course, when the pandemic hit, then everything went online. So, even in-person lessons. I mean, I've had students that I would send lessons to that I would, prepare on a video and then send to them. And I still occasionally have students like that send me videos and don't do the real-time thing. But this has made it a lot easier. I get requests now all the time. I just got a request from a guy in Switzerland. I've got a student down in New Zealand. I've got students in Germany, in Austria. I've got students across the States, even in my hometown. So of LA, they live 20 minutes away, but we do it this way, obviously because of the pandemic. But it's become a system that we've all gotten used to. So I think in that regard, although the pandemic has been a negative in some capacities, I think it's been a positive for this type of communication.
Yeah, for sure. It was an accelerator for all the digital learning tools that they were before also. And you said, I mean, you didn't necessarily start teaching online because of the pandemic already before, but it brought up also for you new opportunities and also for the students to keep
Yeah,
learning.
and
And
I remember one situation in particular. I had a student from, I'm trying to remember where he was. I think he was in somewhere in the Middle East, and I don't remember the country. But we did one lesson over Skype, and the connection was terrible. And I felt bad because I wanted to convey things. And I told him, I said, well, because it's such a bad connection, let me make a video to go over the highlights, and I'll send it to you. Then you can download it. And he did. But I mean, that was the point when actually shortly thereafter, Tomas, who I've known a long time, said, hey, I've developed this app, and would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. So that's how that began.
yeah, it's as important as having the right instrument and with the good quality that we also have the right tools for teaching and especially for the sound and for everything. And that makes it much easier.
Absolutely. Well, because that's the whole thing. Like I said before, conveying information to somebody and also being able to get a perspective of who this person is. Because I've never been one to use one size fits all. And there are a lot of educators, some very well known educators, and I'm not going to name names, but they'll use the one size fits all. This is how I do it, this is what you do. And you can't do that because everybody's an individual and they learn differently. They experience music in a different way. And I had a teacher very early on in my development in the junior high when I played trumpet who knew how to take kids of varying levels of ability and who learned differently and made them become a band. And he instilled certain things into them, but he had a way to do it that was individual for each kid. And that's the way you have to treat each student. You can't say, well, okay, this is what I do. You know, if you don't understand, then that's your problem. You have to try to get a feel for who they are, what it is they want, and what they're having difficulty with. Because it's very easy to just give somebody something and say, here, work on this. But I equate it to learning a language. You know, I speak a couple languages because my mother's Dutch and I speak German as well. If I was going to teach somebody German or Dutch, I wouldn't start with Goethe or some really complicated language skills. I would start with how do you order a cup of coffee and a piece of cake? And if you learn to do that and get the result, then you feel satisfaction and you want to continue. But if you order that coffee and cake and the waitress looks at you like you're from Mars, you get frustrated, you walk out and you want to try again because you think, well, they don't understand me. So I think in that capacity of one-on-one learning, you have to be able to convey that through the video means that we have right now to get that out of them. And that's this allows me to do that because I can't feel through this screen, but I get a good feel when I speak to somebody through it because of the quality.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is, I think, what many are scared of to try, or like what they're missing in online teaching, to make this human connection. But I think it's possible. It's not the same way. And if we are looking for exactly replicating like face-to-face lessons, we're not going to find it because, of course, it's different. But it's also possible to build up a connection on a screen because you said you have many students that are literally on another country, another continent, another time zone. But it's still possible in a way to share, the same goals and to get to know a person.
Yeah, well, exactly. I have a student in Hawaii, and Hawaii is it's about 5 hours flying time from Los Angeles. I mean, it's like flying to the other side of the country, and it's an island. But when I talk to him and we work on the lessons together, I can feel I can feel the air, the humidity, and because I've been to Hawaii many times, and I think that's important to get a feel for where somebody's at, even though you're talking to somebody over a screen. Having that ability to have had the in-person experience with people and to translate that to this, that I think that's an advantage, and I think that helps a great deal.
Totally. Did you still have something to adapt and to change from face-to-face lessons than when you started online teaching for your instrument and also for your teaching methods?
A little bit, not as much as I thought I would have to, because a big portion of what I do is discuss things. But when I show things to students, talking about whatever chord or some line or something, I do it in a way where whether they're sitting in front of me in person or they're on a screen, I make sure that the visualization and the description are one, so that they take away something. And I'm not afraid to repeat things, because I think one of the things that happens is, and I say this in my seminars, if you have a question, please ask, because a lot of people are afraid to ask a dumb question. And I always say the only dumb question is the one you don't ask, because if you don't take the opportunity to say, hey, I didn't understand that. And in my case, I just lost a very dear friend, great guitarist and educator, Joe DiOrio, who I've known for 42 years. And we recorded a record together and we toured together, and he was my mentor. But when I met Joe, I asked questions because I wasn't understanding the other instructors when I was at school the way that I thought I should. I had a different sense of how to learn or how I perceived music. And when I asked Joe, I said, hey, this is what's happening for me. And he said, you come and see me. And he realized what I needed, not what the others needed, what I needed. And he was always very direct about giving me things that would work for me. So when I work with people, the most important thing is to make sure that they understand what I'm showing them. And I always say, does that make sense to you? If it doesn't, let me explain it again. Because if it doesn't, I've got to figure out another way to get you to understand it.
Yes, and this is the same thing for on-site lessons, the same. And I totally agree that we need to encourage the students as teachers to ask questions, because otherwise we just continue to tell them what we think is best in that moment, the explanation, but maybe they need something else. They need another word. They need maybe something else that we show them. And it's a dialogue, and this dialogue is necessary. It doesn't matter which setting we have it.
Absolutely. And the advantage on doozzoo is that when I talk about something, if I prepared a PDF of something, which I do a lot, I'll immediately, the first thing I do is I upload it for them to see. They can either put it on the screen or they can, access it and they can download it. But that's a big advantage, because when you have to send things, email takes, seconds. But this is much easier because I can just put it up on the screen and say, here, let's take a look at this, or check this out. Or I'll play them an example of something. I can put the MP3 up and it's there immediately, or a video of something. And, you have to think about creativity is a big part of teaching, because I'm conveying something. But what I do is, and this is something that I always subscribe to as a musician when I perform, is that I'm not the player, I'm the listener. I'm in the audience. And I'm conveying to the player what it is I'd like to hear. So when I'm teaching, I'm also the student. And I'm conveying to the guy teaching, which is me, what I think is best to learn and to share. So, it's like there's two guys in the room, my student, myself as the student, and then me, the teacher.
Yes, totally. And just to the viewers that don't know what you're talking about, I'm showing the tool. The media tool is this library where you can open up and store everything, which is really, really awesome and helpful, because how you said, you can send email, but it costs extra time. So this is so much easier. And there are also the apps. Do you have another function that you really like besides the PDF viewer?
Well, the metronome is handy, because sometimes I have students that don't have the means to use some kind of help with their timing, and so I will bring that up and say, hey, use this while we do this exercise or we do this certain thing. The screen sharing is important too, being able to send the files, but just to be able to look at something. And it saves me the time of having to pull the paper out and look at it here, because I'm looking at the screen and I'm looking at the student. So, the more I can do that, the easier it becomes for me to convey what I want to convey. Because if things get in the way and it gets too technical and things don't work the way you want them to, then it impedes your ability to teach.
Definitely, if it's getting too complicated, we don't want to try it, and then it's not practical anymore. And that's we have to find a balance for those digital learning tools that are helping in a way, but also just if they're like easy to use and not taking too much time away from the main thing, which is making music and teaching music.
Right.
Then
And the other feature I like is that you can record the lesson and then I can save it and send it to the student. And I've had several students ask to do that. I had one guy who just took one lesson. I forget where he was living. I think he was in Scotland or Ireland. And he just wanted to basically take one lesson and asked if there was a way to record it. I said, yeah, we can do that. And then I saved it and sent it to him, so he had that as for his archives. And that's a thing too that I've always allowed people to do. There are a lot of people when they do workshops, they say no recording or please don't use any things. And I always tell people, take your phones out, record this. Or people say, can I record the lesson? Well, now if they want to do it, it's available on the app, so we can just hit the button and there we go. But I think it's important to review what you talk about and what you've learned, because if you only do it once, you may not really understand it completely, or you may understand it incorrectly, and that can be a hindrance to learning.
yeah, it doesn't stick the same way. And that's why the repetition in a way is necessary, because it's a lot of information that is like going on in one lesson, like half an hour, 40 or even 60 minutes lesson. We cannot store all the information. And I remember also from my student times at the university that sometimes after when I watched the video from the lesson, like I didn't remember certain phrases and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And it's also for ourselves. As a teacher, I find it's also interesting to watch the lessons, how I explained it to the students, because in the moment, we are not always aware of how we say certain things. So it's also reflecting for the teachers to rewatch lessons and the material.
Absolutely, that's the best form of learning is to do that. I mean, I learned that almost 40 years ago when I started making records. That when you go in and you record something, you hear back what you think you hear in your head, but you actually learn what you sound like. And the thing is, you have to understand when you're doing something like this and you're explaining something is how do you sound? How does your explanation come across on a broader sense, so that even if you don't connect with everybody, you're able to connect to most people, and you can basically make little alterations to connect to those who don't quite understand what you're talking about. But that only comes from experience, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes and the more comfortable you become with what it is. Again, it's like playing. You have a vocabulary that you use to make music, especially if you're improvising. And when you get up and you talk about a subject you know a lot about, you're going to use the same tools that you use when you're improvising. You have this set of things in your vocabulary, and the order might change, or you might use a different phrase, but ultimately the idea has to be there. And if it's not clear, then no one's going to understand it.
Yeah, this is the same for playing, for performing, and for teaching. This is one and the same thing. And yeah, thanks for sharing, because I hope also through these conversations that this teachers that are still scared to try out something new, online teaching, that they throw themselves into, like learning the instrument was hard, but then we can learn also how to teach online.
I think the biggest fear is the technology, is that something's going to go, wrong. And there have been glitches over the years with the technology. That's obvious that happens once in a while, or the internet breaks up, but you learn to deal with it. I think it's important. But one of the things you said was so important is that about performance. I don't differentiate this, what we're doing right now, with playing a concert for 10,000 people. It's all the same to me, because my being here is to communicate with the audience or the person I'm engaging with, which happens to be you. It's the same thing if I'm performing or I'm talking about music or I'm doing a lesson or I'm doing an interview. It's to communicate, go back and forth, and utilize that communication skill. And I think that's the thing about those that are a little afraid of the technology. If you feel comfortable that you have the communication skills to do your job or your calling as an educator, then there's no problem, because that's not going to hinder you. It's only going to allow you to reach more people.
Yeah, totally. And that's a way that online teaching helped um, to reach more people, which is also beautiful, and to give also opportunity to study an instrument to those that maybe don't have nearby a teacher in person. And yeah, I think this is also why we should use it for. We have to, as musicians, to share the knowledge that we get, and maybe you don't find the teacher that is like matching in the best way for you in your town, but maybe online, and it's still the same way.
Yeah, it allows me to have students, and I mean, I travel a great deal, or I did before the pandemic, to various countries to perform and do workshops as well. But if I have time, I will meet people in person, but then you only have a chance to see them for a short period of time. This allows me to see them on a regular basis if they want to continue the study. And I've actually acquired quite a number of students in the last few years through that. They were at a workshop somewhere in Italy or something, and I said, "Hey, can I study with you regularly? Is that possible?" I said, "Yes, of course." So whatever the time zone is. Now I have to sometimes make sure I check my clocks to see where I'm at, because I was in Japan on a tour and I was teaching a student in LA, so I had to make sure that the times worked out. Or if I'm in Europe, I have to make sure that my US students, what the time difference is as well. So
But still a win-win for
absolutely,
everybody.
yeah, it is. And I can do it from my hotel room. So
Yeah, that's not bad. Then, would you say that for your instrument, for guitar, is it working either way for beginners and also for more advanced students to learn online the instrument?
yes, absolutely. The level is not the thing. It's never been. I know a lot of people shy away from, they say, well, you have to have this level, or I only want to take beginners because I only want to teach this. I think in the end, teaching is just a vehicle to exchange information and let that person learn something to be able to execute something on an instrument. It's like I said before about the language. If you're teaching somebody a phrase that they can use 100 times and get a satisfaction out of that phrase, then you've done something which has allowed them to learn something of great value. It's not about making people virtuosos. I've had students that are, very, very advanced on their instrument, have a lot of experience, and they still didn't get what I was trying to talk about because they were too closed-minded, or they got a lot out of it. It depends upon the person too. I mean, you have to look at, or beginner students that I thought would not really be a higher level. They understood things on an intuitive level. So you never know. But I think whether it's beginners, intermediate, or whatever you want to call it, there's always a place to give somebody something, and you have to make sure that they're internalizing it and that you see the result, that you can see that the little light bulb goes off in their head, because everybody learns differently, and you can only gauge it by the you as not the teacher, but you as the student. So you have to put yourself in their position, and that's what I try to do. So I don't think there's any disadvantage to any level. If people say, well, what about playing together? And that's something that people make records like that now. So there are ways to do that. But I think when I'm taking the hour or whatever it is I use to explain to somebody something, my main goal is to make sure that they have the tools to go practice, to get something out of it. They can spend the hours in the woodshed. If they need to practice for the next 2 weeks on that particular thing we worked on, then they have it. When I sign off, I know you got it. Okay, great. You have any questions, let me know. But it's not about, let's play for an hour together and see if we come up with something that you'll learn. I think it's better to give them the nuts and bolts. It's kind of like saying, okay, if you're going to bake a cake, these are the ingredients that you would use, and try this. Make sure the oven does this. I found it good if you put a little bit of this in there and see how it comes out. Go bake the cake and tell me how it came out. Now, they might come back and say, man, the cake was incredible, or it was terrible. But okay, so what was terrible about it? Well, I think I overcooked it, or I think I did this. Okay, why? Let's figure that out. So it gives you something to work off of, and it's the same thing, with music. You talk about this, and why are you not understanding that chord? Okay, well, when you get here, what happens when you do that? And I also have a lot of students too that will go play in their town. They have little bands that they play with, once a week or once a month, and I say, okay, so when you go and you do your rehearsal, try that out at the rehearsals and see how it works. See how that works when you're playing with this guy, or when you play with the piano player, try this. See if that works. If that's a better solution. So those are things you can only acquire through the experience that you've lived yourself, that you can share with a student. But it is possible to do it in this form.
I'm very happy to hear from you all your experience, and that you also confirm that it's really worth also to invest the time to get to know these digital tools and helping each other to get open-minded, and because it's a new area, and we have to use those tools that we have as at disposal. We're not It's not going back in time, so it's now this new chapter for the music education, which is not replacing anything. It's not that something becomes worse or not usable anymore, but it's like a plus. I see it personally as a advantage, and something that we can use in plus.
Yeah, I think that the technology, and when I learned to play music back when I was a kid, there was none of this existed. We had to take record players and make little cassette tapes, and then we could listen to the cassette tapes. And I remember the first cassette player that I had that played at half speed, so you could hear certain phrases a little bit better to figure out what was happening. But you had to invest the time, regardless of the tools that we have. You have to invest the work. The work has to be there. It's not about that, well, this tool is going to make you become a virtuoso. No, you have to invest the time. And that has not changed in the past 500 years of playing music. But this allows you, as an educator or as a student, to connect with people that you may never connect with if you don't travel outside of your town, as you said before, or you don't have the means to do that, or there's no one around to show you. And that in itself is a great advancement of the whole thing about communicating and also spreading the whole thing of music. I know a lot of guys think that the best way to learn is to be in a room together and play. It is to a certain degree, but because we have these tools available to us, if you tell people, okay, I can take you on a virtual tour of Woodland Hills right now, but if I showed you what you could see, maybe that inspires you to one day get a plane ticket and come to Woodland Hills and see exactly what it was that I was talking about. And your expectation will be this, but what's really there is this. So if it's the same with music, if you learn on this digital platform and your expectation is there, you're actually going to exceed that, because when you get into the real world of actually playing, you'll have all these tools that you can draw from, which will be very advantageous.
That's a beautiful final message. And if I could also go on much longer to hear from you and also to learn from you, because I'm have a completely different background as a classical trained violinist. So it's very interesting for me also to share the knowledge with music colleagues like you. And I want to be also respectful for your time. That's why I'm thanking you very much for your insights, for sharing, for your honesty, and for continuing teaching, and that what you do, for sharing. Thank you very much for your knowledge.
My pleasure.
Take care and all the best.